I have kind of a background in international conflict management, so the field of global health was kind of new to me when I got here to DU, but it was a really great experience, so we'll talk about that more in the coming hour or so.
And my name is Rachel, and I am a second-year human rights student. I spent the summer focusing on global health research, and I was also really involved in designing training.
I'm Luke Waggoner, a second-year development student as well, and my two foci here at DU are Middle East politics and civil society development. So I got to really kind of flex those muscles in Jerusalem this summer, but with a more specific focus on infrastructure, which we'll get into in a bit too. So.
All right, and please stop us at any time if you guys have questions. You can just shout them out. It doesn't have to be very formal. But I'm just going to give a quick overview about what Grassroots Jerusalem is trying to do, who they are. It's a new organization, and we came in they'd been working for a little bit, but we came in really where they were getting their feet on the ground and getting into the communities a lot more than they had been in the past. They just hired a lot of new field staff that were taking charge of that, and so we came in at a really pivotal time that they were trying to decide what their mission was, what they were going to be about, and kind of what they were going to focus on for the summer. So we had a lot of input on where we were going to go with our research, and we had a lot of flexibility in what we were going to focus on. But Grassroots Jerusalem is really working to provide a map of the current grassroots and civil society organizations working in the Jerusalem area. The main goal is to have this map as a way for people to make connections with other organizations in the area, to connect with the international community, and to really have the community speak for themselves and say what their needs are from a grassroots level, instead of an international NGO coming in and telling them what they need. So the goal of creating this map, this evolving map, is to strengthen the capacity of grassroots organizations. And Grassroots Jerusalem is really focusing on creating an effective forum for community-based organizations and civil society organizations to really understand what they need to do and to have a long-term plan and to have goals and figure out their strategy for reaching these goals.
One thing to note when talking about the idea of grassroots, even just in the name, is that the leadership of Grassroots Jerusalem, one of their big kind of philosophical beliefs is that the international community has truly failed in the ability to bring resolution to the conflict. And so one of the reasons that their whole effort is in working with these individual communities is that they believe that the only way for the kind of development, but also conflict, the conflict to come to some sort of, more of an equilibrium than it has been for the past, and I think we'll talk mostly about the past 10 years, because the conflict each decade has really changed. But one of the reasons why grassroots is their whole method is that they don't really believe that, for example, the UN, which is passed, what they sent to the UN, even at the beginning of the summer when we were there and there was talk of this, it was kind of the sentiment, particularly amongst Palestinians in East Jerusalem, was this isn't going to do anything for anybody. Now we can get back to a conversation about that particular part, but just in thinking about what Grassroots Jerusalem does, believes, the whole idea behind working with these communities was community empowerment, because they didn't see any other solution. So just with that in the back of your mind, I think that's a good way to think about what the work was kind of rooted in.
Yeah, and kind of along with what Greg's saying, I mean, the whole issue of Israel-Palestine is so incredibly politicized that infiltrates every sort of development or intervention project that's done there. And so, yeah, it does complicate things quite a bit. And so one of the things that, one of the reasons that Grassroots Jerusalem is taking this particular tack is that there seems to be a disconnect between organizations and institutions and then the community and the actual needs. So Grassroots Jerusalem, one of parts of their vision is to bridge the gap between needs and resources. And so, again, given the complexity of this issue, which we come into contact with a lot, and we'll get into a little bit more later, on every single level, from language to maps to the specific manner in which we approach different communities and different community leaders, we were constantly confronted with this political issue of the conflict itself. And so that colored everything we did. And so bear that in mind as we continue.
So kind of already talked about this, but the goal is to really get community-based information and hear from the community what they need and what they want and their struggles. And that's kind of how the assessment was designed. We wanted to create an assessment that was really focusing not just on the numbers and not just on, you know, the big picture, but really the community-specific picture, what's going on in each individual neighborhood, and trying to compare and contrast and see why it could be different in one neighborhood versus another, and to really collect stories and narratives to understand what's going on and what is shaping these communities' daily life.
In just thinking about the communities, once again, it's important to note that within Palestine, every neighborhood is really fragmented. And in large part, that's because of the way that the city is being built, rebuilt in a sense. So one of the major reasons that this whole community assessment was being put into place is just getting around is really, really hard, because there are checkpoints everywhere, there are walls being built between communities, community members don't talk to each other because of historical ownership of the land, and so just in considering the background for such an assessment program, just the reason it was being conducted is because it's the most fragmented society I've ever been in. And once again, we'll talk a bit more about the geography in a moment, but just it's because when thinking about the assessment, at least when I went into it, and you begin to think about an assessment, you're thinking, okay, we all think about the word assessment. It can mean so many different things in so many different contexts. In this particular location, thinking about, we worked in what was 7 to 9 communities, 8 communities, and people from these communities rarely went to the other communities. And so the actual level of integration, interaction amongst Palestinians in particular, and let alone the African community in the Old City, let alone, I mean, it's not just an Israeli-Palestinian area. When you think about it, is there's just being 2 groups. There are really quite a few more, hence the need for such an assessment.
Yeah, I think that's really important to keep in mind too when we were doing the assessment, when we first started to look at it, is that because everything is so sensitive, just us asking certain questions could really set off a whole bad path, and we wouldn't really get the information that we needed if we started from a security standpoint or from asking them where certain things are. People don't want this information about where their home is to get back to the Israeli government and fear that their home will be demolished the next day. And they have good reason to fear outsiders coming in and asking them these questions. So that's why the field coordinators were so important, and that's kind of what made our job very hard, because we weren't really the ones that were going in and asking these questions. We did get to sit in and talk, once the connections were made, and speak with some local council members and speak with community leaders, but it was hard for us to kind of make the inroads into certain communities, and certain communities were more welcoming than others. And we had a great experience in one of the communities that kind of got everything moving for us.
There's a lot of distrust in general. And so even asking basic questions about how is your water supply, people get like, why are you asking me? What are you trying to do? And so, and recognizing that reality was an important lesson. It was an important lesson that needed to be learned quickly and needed to be adhered to always.
And obviously, we don't have time to go into the conflict and all the complexities that go along with it. But I wanted to give you
It took us weeks, if not the whole summer.
Yeah.
And I still don't fully understand. I mean, we get it, but when you get there, you think, oh well, there's Israelis and Palestinians that kind of don't get along, and then you go further and further and further, and the depth of this conflict is it's immense.
Yeah, and I've been focusing on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for a long time, and I really came at it with a view of what was going on in the West Bank, what was going on in Gaza, but I really had no idea how complex the issue of Jerusalem is, and it's kind of its own issue when you're looking at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and it takes on its own character. So just to give you an idea of where we are and what we're talking about, we were focused on East Jerusalem, which is technically occupied territory, and in the West Bank. But there's the Palestinians living there have a different status than Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And I don't know how much I should go into the Oslo process and everything, but I think on the next slide I can show you a little bit.
Yeah.
So, without going into too much detail, as we go back to the fragmentation of Palestinians, that there's certain things that have happened along the way that have really contributed to the fragmentation of society here. And one of those things is Oslo and setting up the different control areas of the Israeli government. So if you look at this map, you can see how fragmented it really is. And if you can see the green line, that's the 1948 or 67 line, depending on how you want to view it. But
yeah, and this is relevant information with regards to our research too, because one of the communities we focus on specifically, which we'll get into, is called Al-Quds, and it is kind of a microcosm of all of this. It has all of these issues at play. Areas A and B, where Area C is under full Israeli control, militarily and civil control. Area B is Palestinian civil control and Israeli military control, and Area A is full Palestinian control militarily in terms of civil control. And so this was part of, like we've said, Oslo, which was supposed to be a transition to make the entire West Bank into what would be considered Area A. It's supposed to go all completely into Palestinian control, and yet this is still the reality on the ground right now. So.
And as we said, what's important to note before we get into one of the next map overlays is that the green line was the agreed upon division between the two regions. We probably all know this to a large degree, but as we begin to think about it, when we hear the green line, the armistice line, the 67 line, the 48 line, it's all just referring to the divide. So, or the agreed upon divide. So,
which cuts right through Jerusalem.
Right. Which is why it's so complicated.
Right.
So.
And then the last layer on this map is the settlements, which is a huge issue. I'm sure you've heard about it in the news.
It's all over the news all the time. So we hear settlements, but until you actually walk up to one, it doesn't mean much.
And the background of Israeli settlements is very complex, and there's many different reasons that people move into settlements: religious, ideological, financial. But they're popping up all over the West Bank, as you can see. I mean, really dividing the West Bank in ways that make having a Palestinian state quite difficult. But we won't get into too much of the politics. And then this would be the wall that's being built.
And then we'll photo that in a few minutes.
It's kind of hard to tell, but the red is what is built already, I believe. And then the black dotted lines are proposed or under construction. So you can see that the wall doesn't really follow the green line at all. It kind of cuts into the West Bank, and it actually, if you look at it very closely, it's encircling the settlements, so the settlements are protected. Which makes our work on the community assessment very difficult as we're trying to understand what's going on in these kind of communities where Walajeh is between the Israeli government and also Area C. So it's under, half of it is under Israeli occupation, half of it is under the Jerusalem government.
So just kind of zooming in, on one of the last slides we saw, you see Jerusalem as being that area kind of right where you have the little slice, and then that little inlet is West Jerusalem on the left, East Jerusalem on the right. So with that in mind, here's kind of a zoomed in image of where we were living. Now, one of the reasons the mapping was so important to do is that if you look at the words, I mean, this is obviously an English map, so things aren't written in Hebrew, they're not written in Arabic, yet even the whole point of kind of the mapping was that the fact that this is called Ir David, as opposed to City of David, as opposed to a city called Silwan, that in and of itself makes people just furiously angry. You hear about stone throwing, you hear about riots, you hear about all these things. The fact that on this map it's called Ir David, if a Palestinian were in the room, they'd say, that's what it's called. It's called Silwan. It's not, what is Ir David? It's City of David, and City of David was this biblical reference to what was there, a long time ago, and doing all these archaeological digs. But just in looking at this map, you can see how many, this is Mount of Olive, this is written in English, and this is Atur, and here's the Ir David is, I guess that's a Hebrew reference to a large degree, whereas you've got, this is written in Hebrew, an English version of Hebrew. But if you go through, just the fact that there's multiple historical narratives of each region is just, it's what makes this whole area so complicated. So we were living kind of in the area on the right. This is, East Jerusalem is right there, and it slices right here. So the old city is what stands basically right between East Jerusalem, West Jerusalem, and Israelis never walk over here. Palestinians never walk over here. So we were walking back and forth almost every single day, and I would say that we were definitely amongst the minority of people who actually crossed the line. There was no checkpoint in this part of the line, and it's a little bit further over, but we'll kind of get back to that. Here's just an image of the old city, just for kind of context. The old city is very densely populated, very small, kind of what it sounds like. It's an old city. If you've ever been into kind of a very old, small, I mean, I guess the Middle East is its own feeling, but like any really densely populated area, it's, yes.
Sorry, where exactly were you living? Was that the A?
That's actually just where Google Maps picks up Jerusalem.
So if you see the Mount of Olives area, that's actually where I was living, and then everyone else was pretty close by there in East Jerusalem.
Greg was in Wadi al-Jos, which is just to the north, if you can see that. And then a little further north, there's an area called Sheikh Jarrah, which is where I was living. So we pretty much occupied, forgive the pun, the east side of Jerusalem.
Right.
The whole yeah, sorry.
So this is zoomed out by about like one more tick on Google Maps. So you have, once again, you have the west, you have the east, and so, yeah, this, and actually not much further this way is Jordan, which is what's really crazy. If you stand at the top of this is a hill, and it's Mount of Olives. If you stand there in the middle of the night, you can actually see Jordan. It's just like right there, which is what's crazy. How you realize how close you are to absolutely everything.
That was another thing that we saw too when we first got there. Mika, who's in charge of Grassroots Jerusalem, he founded the organization a few years ago. He gives a tour of Jerusalem, and so we go back and forth across the Green Line, and he shows us all the different issues that are involved with the conflict. He gives us a lot of great stories about how the conflict has affected people, individual people, not just populations. And in that tour, one of the things that I really picked up on, which was kind of surprising to me, is how small the area is. I mean, we hear about it on the news so much; it's kind of assumed that it's this massive piece of land that everybody's fighting. It's really not that big. I mean, literally from the furthest west point of Palestinian territory to Jordan is not that. It's a few miles, and so the complexity is expanded even more so given the tight quarters that everybody's living in.
These are just some images of Olives at night, kind of East Jerusalem, downtown, kind of center city. Here's one more layer zoomed out, so you can see where East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem kind of cut into each other. Anyway, we're spending a lot of time on geography, but it's just so important to understand the geography when thinking about any assessment, just because it is the whole point of the assessment to a large degree is geography.
Yeah, and with our mapping work, it was amazing to see how politicized maps are. I mean, we knew it going into it, but to really sit in on these conversations and understand the level of complexity that goes into maps is quite staggering here. We are working with an open source mapping database, which is OpenStreetMap, and that's what we're using to have the communities map their own roads and services. And we had to sit down with an Israeli organization that was using OpenStreetMap and mapping and try to decide how Jerusalem would be labeled on the map.
What do you call it?
Do you call it Yerushalayim in Hebrew? Do you call it Al-Quds in Arabic? Do you write it both ways in Hebrew and Arabic? And
you write English
and maybe just
words, English letters, but Hebrew script or Arabic script. I mean, because you could write it in about 8 or 9 different ways, and it would piss somebody off no matter what you did.
So right now, there is nothing on the OpenStreetMap. It does not say Jerusalem at all, because we couldn't come to a decision. We had the same argument with the logo, what we're going to do with the Grassroots Jerusalem logo, and that took forever to decide what language it was going to be in and what kind of message we wanted to send.
And it is important. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, so in some ways, one of the arguments, I think, behind all this is that instead of telling all this history and potentially getting into a lot of terminology battles, is that you can just represent everything as a point, right? That this is, your health or your development outcomes will be affected by your proximity to this wall or this settlement or your ability to go here and not here. That you can, in a sense, reduce it all to, pixels and bits and bytes, and just as kind of much as any of our risk factor, right? That your distance to the wall, your access to this or that is really not all that different from your access, your distance to a sanitation facility in Canara or anything else.
It's important to know too, with regards to Grassroots Jerusalem, one of the things that attracted me to this internship in the first place was that they don't take sides. They're about development, they're about increasing well-being in the lives of everyone living in Jerusalem, regardless of which side of the line they're. They start with the highest priorities, which happen to be East Jerusalem, because the services are so much poorer in terms of condition on the east side of Jerusalem. And so they don't subscribe to a one-state, two-state, multi-state solution. They just want to help, which may sound trite, but it was very appealing because, it's so refreshing. It is very refreshing.
So just to give you an example of the kind of work that we were doing, we were talking about Wallage to be in the beginning, and this was a great community for us to start with because it's small. There was only 2,000 people living in the community. It's kind of a microcosm of all the issues in Jerusalem. There's a wall that's being built around the community, which will obviously have huge implications on access to services. There's no clinic in Wallage, so if the wall is completed, there's going to be huge problems. This is Wallage. And there's a settlement there. There's all the infrastructure issues that come along with that. And so we started here, and we had great connections in Wallage. So that really made it a lot easier for us to get the assessment information that we needed. And because it was so small, it made it a little more manageable. And because the wall was literally being put into the ground while we were working there. Like the first day we were there, we literally walked by backhoes and bulldozers ripping the ground up and putting an 8-meter concrete structure to cut the community off from the rest of the land. So just being there at that point, it was almost before things were at their worst. We got there like watching it being put into place, so we could actually watch the transition from community where they could come and go as they needed to, for lack of better terms, like a prison. So. And then, as you can see on this map of Wallage, this is from OpenStreetMap. It's really zoomed in, but you can see there's nothing really on the map. And these little points that you see, there's the little grocery store symbols and a mosque symbol. This is stuff that the community had mapped themselves while we were there and we were training them. But there's really not anything on the map in Wallage. And we're trying to provide, it's almost providing evidence too, that there's this community here and this is what's going on and this is what the reality on the ground is. So you can see there's only a few things that we were able to map, but it was a long process of coming into the community, and this is what I was really involved with, was training the community on how to use this mapping technology and actually going out into their neighborhoods. Yeah.
So we're using like handheld GPS?
Yeah, we are using GPS units, and we would go and you can walk and collect data points along the way, and then the data points we would come back and edit in OpenStreetMap and put it on. And the thing about OpenStreetMap is anyone can edit it. Anyone can add to it and change it. There are some it's a Wikipedia actually application. So they have some framework for how they manage it, and there's people that actually monitor what's going on. But it is open source, so it is kind of appealing for us, especially with Google Maps. One of the issues was that the Israeli government doesn't let Google Maps change anything on the map. So what we saw is how it's going to be. I did see an article come out that they're going to start doing the satellite technology and the Street View, so that's huge. But OpenStreetMap was the perfect forum for us, we found. We had Map Kibera, an organization that had mapped the slum of Kibera, help and consult on how to use this technology and the process of community mapping is fascinating and how it works and how to mobilize people. And these were all volunteers that we had. So it was really,
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
No.
Are there apps on smartphones that people can use, or do they have to have GPS in order to?
We're starting, they were looking at research that showed what kind of technology Palestinians had currently, and they found that most people had cell phones, but not a lot of people had smartphone technology, and it's not in the capacity of Grassroots Jerusalem right now to offer that. So their vision is to have a set of GPS units that communities can use, that we'll use in our trainings, and then Grassroots Jerusalem, while we were there, they were actually building a community center to kind of be the hub for all the community capacity building resources that they were trying to provide. And that way people can come in and check out, have some kind of system to check out the GPS units to go out and map.
About once a month, my smartphone thinks I'm at best reviewed. And at least once a day, it has me off by more than 10 blocks, which in a place this 10 blocks would mean wrong, you'd be in the settlement.
Exactly.
In the town.
Exactly.
Another kind of a part of the ethos behind grassroots community mapping too is really getting a tangible picture of how the community sees its community, which was important. we didn't, again, this whole disconnect between organizations and the people is kind of mitigated with this because individuals can come in and show what they have and what is important to them by virtue of what they map. Because we try to leave the constraint, or limit constraints as much as possible and say, map your community as you see it. And so that literally they paint us a picture of their community from their eyes. And so it's a neat vantage point.
This is a great picture that Greg took. We had a great photographer with us documenting everything, so we have wonderful pictures.
I was that annoying guy taking pictures.
It was amazing. I'm glad we had it. And this was at the first workshop that we had in Wallace. You can see we had a pretty large turnout. And this was just, the first step was really getting people excited, getting people to understand why we were doing this, the importance of mapping. And we really had great levels of success with this because people, they came back for the second workshop, they stayed the whole day for the first workshop. People were so excited about this
really
opportunity. And we, you know, it was our first, it was kind of a practice run and we didn't know how it was going to go. And I was amazed by the level of enthusiasm for this project, to have all these people that are volunteering their time to sit here all day. I mean, this was a long workshop, and people were really into what we had to say. And we spent a lot of time developing this workshop in a way that we could really get the community to tell us what they wanted to map. And it was fascinating to see the kind of things that they would come up with. We drew out, okay, so how would you divide up your community? And we found out they had 7 different areas they wanted to map, so then we could split them up into 7 different groups. And then we made a list before they went out and started mapping. What's important to you to map? What do you want, you know, Palestinians to know? What do you want the international community to know? What do you want your audience to know about your community? And they mapped things like 1948 abandoned homes, so the homes that were people had fled during the 48 war. And they mapped garbage bins. That was really big. That hadn't been taken out in so long. They mapped bus stops and all the other things that you would definitely think about, but the garbage bins and the 1948 homes were different. And it's interesting, you go back into OpenStreetMaps and try to edit this, and there's no presets for a 1948 abandoned home or, you know, an abandoned or a trash can that's overflowing. So,
quite honestly, you could probably tell a large part of the story of the conflict based on a map of trash cans and the number of times a month their trash is collected. You could literally just paint the entire conflict based on trash collection.
And they were never on fire when you were there.
Oh, they were on fire all the time. They were all, I mean,
accidentally or intentionally?
I don't know.
Intentionally,
Actually,
they always
intentionally. They would burn their trash
they
when it
burn
would get
their
full, and it
trash
would
a
just,
lot.
the whole block would be full of trash smoke.
It is a very distinct smell,
Oh, it's
especially
great.
like in Salon, where
It's
it's pretty crowded, and the trash really doesn't get taken out that much, and there's always trash bins on fire there. Right outside my apartment, there was always a trash bin on fire, which is great.
I'm not joking. You could write an entire policy paper analyzing the past 10 to 20 years of the conflict based on trash cans. Which is,
Rick's recruiting.
Or could you find a health impact?
respiratory or
Well, and another thing to note about this mapping process, it's very empowering for the citizens. I mean, they don't feel like anyone ever listens to them, and there is a huge divide in terms of communication by individuals affected directly and acutely by this conflict and those decision makers, if you will. And so things like this, they're seeing that what they have just done is immediately going onto the internet. It's a neat thing. It's a neat thing to watch.
Yeah.
What populations were you working with? You said you worked in like 6 to 9.
We had 8 communities that were set aside to work on this summer. The problem was we didn't really get to go into every single community and do this process or even do our assessment in every community, because when we got there they were still making connections and building relationships with the community. So Wallace was a great one to start with, and we were making pretty good inroads in the Old City, which is quite complex because there's an African community and a Gypsy community, and obviously Palestinians, and it's a very segregated area, and it's also very crowded and difficult to work in. And then we were trying to make inroads in Silwan, which is a very politically intense community where we were talking about the city of David construction that's going on, and a lot of house demolitions, and really, really sensitive to having outsiders come in. So for us, Wallace was perfect. It worked out really well. They were really welcoming of us coming in, and they were really excited about the process. So unfortunately, we didn't get to go into that many communities, but we did get to really get to know one community very well, which was really nice to kind of have that relationship leaving.
Wallace is kind of down here near Beit Jala, too.
It's close to Bethlehem.
And then these two, Har Gilo and Gilo, are settlements if you can see, like this is the green on the dotted line, and this is the Palestinian side. And these two, Gilo and Har Gilo, are settlements that are being built currently, expanded and built, and which is another reason that Walajeh is such a point of conflict, is that it's literally on the planting sites of, I think it's Gilo. So, yeah.
And eventually, so Grassroots Jerusalem will have their website up soon. They're redoing everything to kind of put this mapping platform onto their website to use as a resource for communities. And the OpenStreetMap that I showed you, it'll be connected to people who can post pictures and stories and videos and kind of have a blog sense to it, so people can see what's going on in the community, kind of community reporting along with community mapping. It follows the same model as Map Kavira, and hopefully once that's up and running, it'll be really interesting to see. We're going to have community profiles of what the community-based organizations are that are working in the different communities, what the main issues are, the history. It'll be a great resource for anyone that's looking to go and work on development in these communities. Do you have a question?
Yeah. What kind of process did you guys have to go through to verify what they came back after mapping?
Yeah, it's definitely an issue, and that's the thing with open source technology, any open source technology. I mean, for this, obviously, this time we had one of our staff members with each group. So we were helping them, and we knew exactly what they were mapping. We were making sure they were doing it correctly, and then we were helping them edit it on OpenStreetMap as well. But eventually, we're not going to be able to do that, and people are going to be able. We hope that people will take the initiative to go out and map their own communities. And it really is a process of open source technology that people can see it and edit it. And there's some people, even in East Jerusalem, that are really interested in mapping and really believe in the importance of having, accurate information. And you can go and edit it yourself, and we could go and edit it ourselves too. So it can always change, and it's always changing. And obviously, there's always the fear that it's going to change for political reasons, which there's a lot of things that go into that.
Yeah.
And
did you train people in, say, policing, as far as not yet?
Well, I think it's one of those things where through enough people in being involved, you would hope that there's a built-in system of checks and balances for their own community. When I first got there, I put a couple of labels onto like OpenStreetMaps or OSM just to see if they would stay, and some of them stayed, and some of them were deleted. You would put you put like a label on top of a couple of historical religious sites, and you'd write it in English, you write it in Arabic, and you would see how quickly it changed back to Hebrew, or how quickly it changed. I mean, just witnessing that in and of itself was telling.
The idea of policing, too, is I went to a conference here in Denver. It was OpenStreetMap conference to present what we were doing in Jerusalem. And it's not just in Jerusalem. Everyone was kind of blown away at how complex mapping was there. But at the same time, everyone has the same problems with policing and how do you set up kind of standards or practices. And I think this is something that's really going to keep evolving as we go throughout the process. It's something we talked about with cell phone reporting. If we wanted to use Ushahidi, which is a platform that's used in a lot of emergency situations, to report, if we wanted to report checkpoints, road closures, child arrests, those kind of things. And there really needs to be some kind of system in that, especially in that case, if you're reporting these kinds of things, to have someone that's actually checking, or to have someone that you really trust that's making the final say on what's going on. So it's quite complicated, but it's something that I think is going to keep evolving as we get more involved in the communities.
I think it's also, I think there was a question before about using cell phones as opposed to GPS units. As the summer progressed and we got more into the whole idea of mapping, other social media platforms kind of started to emerge as being other powerful tools that locals could use. So, for example, let's say that there is a checkpoint closure on the way to Ramallah, and people go back and forth there all day, every day, but you can't get to work. So, whereas when most of us who have smartphones, like I'm a big smartphone nerd, so I look at where I'm going and see the little red dot and find another way to get there. Well, they don't have anything like that here. There's no reporting on traffic jams, for example. There's no radio like, oh, don't take Route 70 today, it's jammed up. So, for example, people can use their cell phone, take a photo of what's happening at a checkpoint, use Twitter, tweet it. It can show up on onto a variety of social media platforms. People can be tapped into that, and this is actually happening in other conflicts around the world. I mean, if we think of Haiti, for example, Haiti was run based on based on Twitter, essentially. I mean, they were able to communicate using this mechanism. So one of the long-term visions of a lot of us and a lot of other people who are working on the social media idea is that truth-telling, the narrative in this part of the region, if you haven't picked up on it, after getting back, the narrative is very skewed, largely, if we think about the conflict in the region. So just by giving people the opportunity to actually speak using the internet, there's power. That's truth, power. It's huge with cell phone technology these days. So,
Did you have a question?
Yeah.
So how did you guys in that community recruit your volunteers, and do you feel like the entire group of volunteers is really representative of every subset of the community?
that's a good question.
Yeah, the process for that, we had our field coordinator that met with the local council and the women's council in Wallace, and they know the community very well, and it made it a lot easier in Wallace too, because it's not really that divided of a community. Some of the communities are very divided. They kind of have an issue of Hamas and Fatah, but it's kind of subsided since, in the past few years. And our field coordinator was able to work with the community leaders to identify people that would best be suited to do this. And we tried to get a good amount of young people and older people and people from around the community. So we tried to have a good sampling of people. As you can see, there were mostly women, actually, that came.
Which is awesome.
Which was great. And then we had a good amount of younger men that were really, and that was nice because they knew how to use technology. Some of the women had never used computers before. So that made it really difficult when we came in to start trying to help them edit on OpenStreetMap. And then we could have the younger guys come in and help them and show them. And they were actually really great with each other. But it was interesting to see, the older people and the younger people had really different views on what should be mapped and what shouldn't be mapped and what to call it. And so there were some kind of conflicts, but they all were really excited about participating, and we did have a good turnout when everyone came back.
I think that if you want to think about the linkages between the communities, essentially, one of the things that we were saying in the beginning was, because it's a grassroots program, first community-based organizations were identified, essentially. So where did people spend their time? What was the local community council? Whatever that may look like. To work with the community council, we had Palestinians who were locals to the region who would then kind of be the person to go in and talk to the council. But then we would work with the Palestinians who would go in and then work on the assessment with the other Palestinians and the one Israeli in our organization. So it was almost like there was a 3 or 4 step link to people who actually lived there, and it was all based on community-based organizations. So that's why it was completely bottom up.
Which was largely necessitated because of the distrust.
Right. If we walked in, they would just, I don't even know, they would look at us like we were crazy. Right? Yeah, or ask us if we were Israeli or something. Think we were spies. No joke.
So my other focus was working on the health assessment, and we kind of already touched on some of the difficulties that we had in doing our assessment, and the assessment changed a lot over the course of the summer too. We were providing input on what questions seemed appropriate or wasn't appropriate, or we couldn't find information at all. And what we really came out of this process knowing is that there's a lack of community-specific information. There's information about East Jerusalem in general, there's information about Jerusalem, there's information about the West Bank and Gaza, but when it comes to what's going on a community level, for example in Wallace or Silwan, there really isn't much data. And so our job was really not so much to gather all the statistics and all the information and all the research that we could. It was really to see where the gaps were and kind of try to analyze why there are gaps and try to figure out a path forward. And I think what we struggled with a lot is that we didn't really have the necessary tools to go in and do a survey or do a focus group. So it was a lot of secondary data research in the beginning, finding out what is out there, and then going into the communities and talking to the local council or the women's council and asking these kind of questions and really just listening to their stories more than anything. So my health assessment was broken up into a couple different categories, and I really made the best progress on mental health, which was really interesting because mental health is really hard to research in Jerusalem. But I found some organizations that are really working a lot around child arrest and home demolition, so it was really trauma related. The other kinds of mental health problems are really pushed aside in Palestinian society, but it was interesting to see what kind of support services have arisen since about 2003 when the wall was really starting to be built, and home demolition started to become quite traumatic for children, and house arrests or child arrests were really traumatic as well. So there are a lot of different systems in place for mental health services when it comes to trauma, which I found quite interesting. Then I focused a little bit on maternal and child health. It was hard to get this information because we didn't really have a lot of community contact. And then what was interesting with the communicable and chronic diseases is that, as we've been talking about in our class, the non-communicable diseases were the big thing in Palestine. Because of a lack of movement and because of the conflict and things that are happening, diets have changed a lot. There's candy everywhere. It's just everywhere. And it's one of those things that you could probably spend a whole summer researching the amount of candy that's consumed because of the conflict, maybe,
Everyone chain smoked, drank
Yeah.
soda constantly,
Yeah.
and ate candy constantly.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe the least healthy place.
So obesity is becoming a problem. Non-communicable diseases are becoming a problem. Wallajay was interesting. I was talking to the Women's Council, and they found that there were starting to be a lot of cases of cancer along kind of where people were living closer to the settlements. So it wasn't anything that was proven, but I found that very interesting. I thought that would be interesting to map the cases of cancer and see if there's any correlation between cancer and the wall being built or settlements being built. So the thing about settlements is that they have these settlements built and they have their sewage systems and they empty out into the Palestinian land. So we actually saw a sewage system where just from the settlement right across the street, it's all their waste is going into Palestinian land. And that was when there was only a few families that were living there, and they were, expecting to expand a lot. So to see the waste that was coming into Palestinian land and was, infecting the soil and the water, and you can just imagine all the problems that would come from that. So there's a lot of issues that can really be researched further, and quite interesting. So there's really a need to. I think Grassroots Jerusalem needs to figure out how they're going to move forward in obtaining this information. Because their whole method is that they want to connect the dots. They want to bring researchers together. They don't want to necessarily be the organization that does the census or the home-by-home survey. Maybe they'll organize focus groups. Maybe they'll connect other organizations that are working on these areas to help create this, but they don't really want to be the ones to go door to door. So they need to decide how they're going to do that because there's a lot of information that we still need to obtain. As we said, we felt like we were working so hard, and that in the summer we would look at the assessment and there's not much filled out. So it's kind of hard to work in this kind of environment because you feel like you're doing so much, but nothing's really happening. It can be kind of daunting sometimes, but it'll be interesting to see what Grassroots Jerusalem decides to do moving forward. And in Wallajay, I had talked to people, and I'm like, "Do you have a census? Have you done anything?" They're like, "Well, yeah, they had a great census. They just haven't implemented it yet because they didn't have the resources or the money to have people going out in the community and asking these questions. But they had a wonderful census. I looked at it. They translated some of the questions for me, and it was very detailed about health and infrastructure and everything. So maybe Grassroots Jerusalem could be the one that would organize other organizations coming in to help them facilitate these surveys. And then our platform could be the place where they publish the results. I know, any time soon.
Yeah, I'll go quickly. The area that I focused on was the infrastructure, and it's broken down into these four categories: water, sewage, electricity, and roads. And the same problems, some of the same problems that Rachel just mentioned, I encountered as well with regards to community-specific information, which was the biggest struggle, but also reliable and detailed information. Wallajay, which is the community that we've said many times we focused on primarily, because it is a highly politicized community in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem, and so there was more information than on some of the other communities we were trying to work on. So it seemed like a good starting point. Also, we did have good contacts in the community. Our field coordinators knew the local council pretty well, and so got us some pretty good interviews, and we were able to kind of to filter out the information. With infrastructure issues, the UN, Amnesty International, and several other organizations have done some pretty good research on the water and sewage issues in Wallajay specifically. And taking the methodology of Grassroots Jerusalem, of taking that secondary data and then trying to fill in the gaps was really worked well with Wallajay, because after I read through these extremely long reports over and over about the infrastructure in these communities, we were able to go talk to the local council members, to the head of the local council, the women council, and say, how is your access to water? I mean, just getting it from a very grassroots level, was important to correlate the two sources and kind of figure out where the truth really was. And so water and sewage were huge issues in Wallachet because of settlement building, as well as just absolutely no help from the municipality. And the reason one of the reasons we kind of explained earlier the politics of areas A, B, and C and the wall is because Wallachet doesn't really fit into any of those categories, and so they're kind of in a gray area. Whereas a lot of communities in, say, East Jerusalem technically have the right to get a lot of their services from the municipality of Jerusalem, but Wallachet is a divided community, and so in terms of its legal status, and so it was unable to access a lot of these services. Oh, yeah, sorry.
What is the official, sort of the macro water source in Wallachet? Is it public or is it rainwater?
It is public, but they only have 24 hours a week of water pumped into Wallachet, which completely undermines their previous agricultural lifestyle, which is what they said. But now the municipality largely controls part of Wallachet, the part that's kind of under the auspices of the municipality. There's half of Wallachet also, though, is technically in area B, or is it C? And so a lot of their water is kind of filtered through the Palestinian Water Authority, controlled in Ramallah. And so they have several different water sources, but it equals out to about 24 hours of pumped water a week. And I mean, rain just doesn't really happen there too much. And so, yeah, exactly. Water, the lack of water, the infrastructure of the water pipeline too was just abysmal. And so while they had 24 hours of pumped water a week, the pressure was terrible, the pipes leaked, and so 24 hours, as meager as that sounds, was a very optimistic interpretation of their access to water.
And these issues are very similar, not just in Jerusalem, but throughout the West Bank when it comes to infrastructure. It's very important.
Yeah, and which directly relates to the sewage issue that they have. Rachel gave an anecdote of one particular scenario in Wallachet. They don't get any help from the municipality with regards to sewage. And so the local council saw this as an obvious real issue that needed to be dealt with, and so they bought or they rent out a truck to come by once a week to gather the sewage and dump it further down the road, essentially. So, I mean, they're kind of just getting by. The finances that they have are just very meager. So to address these issues, they have to really prioritize the more acute needs. And so electricity, same thing, very weak, often damaged the devices that were plugged in because it was not really much of an electrical control. And then the roads were, I think the UN, UNRWA defined them as 66% in poor condition for roads in Wallachet. So transportation and just getting throughout the community was not good either. And so we were able to, in this case it worked really well, like I said. The secondary data research that we did correlated very well with the local council's assessment of the infrastructure. So.
I'll be brief on this. I did kind of my own project to a certain degree this summer through Grassroots. One of the big issues that kept popping up as we were doing these assessments had to do with kind of social well-being issues, kind of what people were able to do, like normal life stuff, just other than be part of the occupation and always be angry about having to go through a checkpoint. So I have a background in music, and so I started to meet these hip-hop artists actually, and started just kind of hanging out with these guys a lot. And one of the groups I worked with was in Bethlehem, and we all think of Bethlehem and the Bible and all sorts of stuff as being this really lovely, wonderful place. Until you get into Bethlehem, you have to go through there. It's not a whole lot of fun. They like to ask you lots of questions, and if you have one color ID, it changes if you can get through, and they shut it sometimes, and there are long lines, and coming in, it just takes forever to get in and out. And this is what it looks like on the inside when you first get in. There's the wall. So the guys I was working with they lived in a refugee camp right inside Bethlehem called the GHA camp, which is very well known for, I think, during the First and Second Intifada. Once again, when we talk about mapping, when we keep coming back to it, there were no road names, there were no road signs, you couldn't drive your cars through anything. So as you went through, there are actually spray painted names that Israeli soldiers would spray paint, like Fork Road, or they would have different names of places so that when they were talking about where battles were going to take place or how to get around, everything was just spray painted on the walls and stuff like that. I worked with these guys. They were called Palestine Street. They've been actually in. Are they in Slingshot Hip Hop or not? I think they were one of the more recognized kind of groups in the area. This was actually their practice base. They would kind of get together when they were 14 and learn how to rap when they were kids, and this was kind of their outlet. And so we went to the Palestinian News Network and did a day working with kids and did kind of a number of hip hop workshops over the summer, which is pretty cool. So I found it to be just amazing, kind of the level of just resilience that people had in there, how much they wanted to, how their poetry was their outlet. So it's funny that I didn't really think this was going to be anything I was doing going into it, but it's amazing how much, going back to the mental health issue, expression is just, that's all they had. This is what these kids had. They had expression, so just learning music and culture, music to express their kind of feelings was huge for them. So by the end of the summer, I think I'd met with about 10 different groups between kind of the south end of East Jerusalem and the north, and even had a couple of groups from up in like Nablus that I'd worked with. And so we didn't get to do nearly as much as I would have loved to do it for 2 years, but maybe later. So anyway,
that's another positive plug for Grassroots Jerusalem too, is that they're very open to the idea that if interns come in and we have these ideas that are not being currently met by the vision of Grassroots Jerusalem, they're very flexible in allowing us to kind of exercise.
I just pitched it and let me go with it, which is kind of cool. Yeah.
Who, can you talk about who worked at Grassroots Jerusalem other than the interns?
Yeah, the interns were kind of the majority, actually. There were, 12 of us?
Yeah, 10 of us.
It was crazy. Way too many.
All from DU?
No, there was 5 of us from DU. And then we had interns from around the world, and we had interns from Italy, England,
Canada.
Where was
Hopefully that number will slim down somewhat.
Yeah, it was too
Our
big.
ace in the hole is that the current internship coordinator is a current student at Corval. So she protects our interns. This is Elaine Moeller, who some of you may run across when she visits again.
And then the structure, there were 2 directors. One's Israeli, one's Palestinian, Micha and Khaled. They work really well together. Micha's really outgoing and passionate and has these great grandiose ideas, and Khaled is kind of really,
Grounded.
very practical and grounded. He actually has a teaching background. He has a law degree. He's really interesting. And then they have...
He's Druze, too.
Yeah, he's Druze. And then there were 3 field coordinators. They're all Palestinian. One is actually a 1948 Palestinian, so she's from the north. And then the 2 other Palestinians are from East Jerusalem. So that was really great to have them and have their perspective. And then we had an advocacy director, Angela, who's Israeli, spent most of her life in England though. But she was really well connected in the advocacy community with journalists and the UN. She we were able to sit down in some really cool cluster meetings at the UN at UNHCR and listen to advocacy strategies with, they were talking with Save the Children and Oxfam and all the other UN agencies working in the area. So really great opportunities to meet with some really high-level people. I met with the director of mental health at UNICEF, and he was awesome, and I met with a couple people at WHO, and just really amazing opportunities because they were so well connected. Everyone in the organization has really great connections in Jerusalem. One of the advantages of being such a really intensive NGO culture there, everyone just knows someone working in an NGO just by nature of being there. So it was great, the opportunities that we had to sit in on these meetings and to have our own personal meetings talking about Grassroots Jerusalem, trying to get information. It was really wonderful.
Yeah, the population of Jerusalem is often broken down into 3 primary demographics. There's Israelis, Palestinians, and NGO workers.
Yeah.
They're that prevalent in Jerusalem. So.
Yeah, huge international community there.
So that's kind of
we could talk
quick
4
snapshot.
days.
Yeah, it was, if you couldn't tell, it was really intense and really crazy and really amazing. So we haven't even talked about protests yet. That was a whole different story.
Can I ask if y'all, so what was the level of frustration over never having done anything? And I mean, I guess, Greg, you got to sort of do something tangible in terms of hip-hop, but in terms of actually, so many students went out somewhere and actually, saved a life or two, somehow, indirectly. Does that, now obviously the whole point of this is to be kind of long-term, sustainable and all that, but is there ever a frustration that you wish you could just
Definitely.
help someone?
Yeah, it's hard because you see so many awful things every day. I mean, it's always in your face every single day, no matter what. You get on a bus and you think you're going somewhere and you end up in a checkpoint, and you see.
Or you get bored.
You end up in a refugee camp
and they pull people off and ask them questions. And who knows?
It's just it's really tough. It's tough to see that every day and not feel like you're directly contributing. But I think Grassroots Jerusalem did a good job in kind of assuring us that you guys are really building the foundation that we need to get going. Because I don't think if they didn't have all these interns this summer, they would not have nearly any of the information, the secondary background information. They wouldn't have gone out and read all these reports themselves. They're in the communities. That's what they do. They needed people to really do the research and really think at this issue from a completely different perspective. So I think that made me feel better in the fact that I was helping establish the foundation for where they were going to focus their efforts. And Greg got to do his own thing, and then I kind of took it upon myself to make a training program for the field coordinator. So I kind of felt like, okay, here I developed something, and at the end of the day, it felt like I had a product. And then I helped Luke. He had a great idea for a women's well-being project, and we both worked on a grant proposal for that. So hopefully they get funded. So there were certain things that we could kind of take as our own and feel like we were really contributing. And Grassroots Jerusalem really encouraged us to do that.
It was essential, too, to really adopt the vision of Grassroots Jerusalem, too, and recognize where they were in their development process. If we had gone in thinking, expecting to change, dozens of lives and save things and to fix the conflict, then we would, it would have been a very demoralizing summer. But recognizing, because we didn't do those things, but we did things.
Plus, the conflict's been going on for quite a long time. This place is.
I try to not take it personally that I didn't fix it. But in all seriousness, recognizing that what we're doing now, we are laying the foundation for Grassroots Jerusalem, which has a pretty incredible vision, and I think is going to be a pretty key player in actually developing and fixing and helping on a very basic individual level. And so it was encouraging whenever, and they were, like Roger said, they were very good at encouraging us by reminding us what our role was in that process and kind of showing us 10 years, this is what we want. They had a plan. They had a vision, which is a rare thing among NGOs there as well. So. Yeah,
there are definitely a lot of difficulties in working with any new organization. They really didn't know what they were going to be doing, and there was a lot of uncertainty the whole time we were there, and a kind of uncertainty around what our role was and what we were expected to accomplish. At first I thought I was supposed to, I should have completed the whole assessment for all 8 communities, by the end of the summer, and obviously that's impossible. But I felt like I had failed because I didn't complete nearly even half of the assessment. But I think setting expectations in the future going forward will make a big difference. So there's definitely difficulties, and I'm just so passionate about what Grassroots Jerusalem is doing, and I'm hopefully going back in the spring and hopefully keep the connection going with DU and keep the interns coming. So.
I mean, to be able to have, that cancer cluster, if it exists, whatever it is, just to have the ability, again, it's impossible to have people on hand to research things like that. So just to have a system where, say, the new information can get out that there might be something here, does someone want to look at it, somewhere in the world with the right training. It's very cool.
One thing, too, just to close with that, in my exit interview with Khaled, he mentioned a new direction they're going to take, the interns in particular, of hiring interns not with a very structured, we want you to do X, Y, and Z, but more saying, these are the issues we want to focus on. Where does your vision, what can you bring to Grassroots Jerusalem within these issues? And so really empowering interns in the future, I think, is something a direction they want to go. So that was encouraging to hear and kind of exciting.